At the turn of the 20th century, air power was just beginning to revolutionize the world. Meanwhile, massive cruise liners transported people across the globe in luxury. Amidst that backdrop, one man dared to dream. What if these two incredible technology achievements could be combined into the largest flying ship ever built? Enter the Dornier DOX, a flying boat that pushed the boundaries of engineering possibilities, a massive marvel that captivated audiences wherever it traveled. It remains an antique that has influenced seaplane designs to this day. Yet we may soon discover why this long-dormant legend might not be entirely dead. This is a story of ingenuity, the relentless march of time, war, and one man's impossible dream. So what exactly is the Dornier DOX? Is it a ship? Is it a plane? Well, actually it's both. The Dornier company, owned and founded by Claudius Dornier, an engineer extraordinaire, built what was, at the time, the most ambitious, heaviest, and most luxurious flying boat the world had ever seen. And you might be thinking, well, so what, Simon? Seaplanes have been around for decades. And you'd be right, but there wasn't a seaplane like this. The Dornier DOX resembles a medium-sized ship with wings, engines, and a tail fin. You look at it from the front, and sure enough, it is a flying boat. It's hard to pinpoint where the boat ends and the plane begins. As such, you'll hear me use the terms flying boat and seaplane today interchangeably. Look, I'm not an engineer, I make YouTube videos. The Dornier DOX was not just any plane. It was an absolute giant, measuring nearly 40 meters, that's over 131 feet in length, and boasting a 47-meter or 156-foot wingspan. It was comparable in size to a Boeing 767-300 jetliner. Remarkably, the 767 took its inaugural flight in 1986, nearly 60 years after the Dornier DOX first soared through the skies. People back then had never seen anything like it. Even the Spruce Goose, which was once the largest airplane ever built, didn't fly until 1947. As a seaplane, the Dornier DOX was truly one of a kind. Consider that this was only about a decade after the Red Baron flew his biplane and just over 20 years since the Wright brothers made their historic flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Imagine something the size of a modern jumbo jet flying around resembling a boat. You might have been forgiven for thinking that the end times were near. And look, the Dornier DOX, despite its enormous size, did indeed manage to fly, though not very easily. It was powered by 12 Bristol Jupiter radial engines mounted across the top of the aircraft on the wings. And you might notice propellers facing both forward and backward, which is intentional. Each block consists of two engines, one facing forward and the other facing backward. This forms what's known as a push-pull configuration. The forward-facing engines pull air into the propellers, propelling the aircraft forward, while the backward-facing engines push air behind them to generate additional forward thrust. This setup was advantageous because if one or multiple engines failed, the remaining ones could still operate effectively. You know what makes a wallet feel outdated? Having to actually open it. Oh my god, it's like, you open it, it's like, oh no, the leather's falling apart, there's receipts everywhere. My one had this special card holder thing, and it was like the leather on the side had just broken and my cards would fall out into my pockets. You just feel this is rubbish. Well, that's why Extra's Card Holder Pro, you just press this button, look at this. Whoop, and your cards pop out. I might show those to you too closely, but it's like all my bank cards in there. So that's fantastic. It's made from recycled aluminium. Fits up to 14 cards. Yeah, I guess. I've got 3. 14? Even if you shove 14 in here, I'm sure it'll still look sleek. In fact, 3, it looks a little bit empty. Could easily fit some more in there. Plus, it's got this thing called the Finder card, which I will actually take out. Solar powered, and so you could finally stop tearing the house apart every time you lose your bloody wallet, which happens to me more often than I'd like to admit. There's also an Android version. It works through the Chipolo app, so whatever your phone you're on, it will work for you. Also worth noting, the build quality on these is excellent. It even smells good. It's got that leathery smell. This is definitely something you will own for years, certainly not months, and it's just a great gift. Get this for, I don't know, maybe I'll get my dad one of these. He'd love this. Right now, Extra is running a site-wide sale up to 30% off until May 19th. And if you use my code MEGAPROJECTS at checkout, you'll get an extra 10% off on top of that. So yes, if you've been meaning to upgrade your wallet, now is the time. Hit the link in the description below. Don't forget my code MEGAPROJECTS. Thank you to Extra for sponsoring, and now back to today's episode. The Dornier DOX was not only a marvel of modern engineering because of its advanced features, but also due to its construction during an era dominated by external wires, biplane layouts, and wooden structures. Compared to its contemporaries, the DOX boasted a remarkably modern design. Its wings were made from a steel-reinforced aluminium-copper alloy covered with heavy linen fabric and painted with aluminium for waterproofing. The aircraft also featured strut bracing with minimal wires and fuselage-mounted sponsons for enhanced stability. However, its design did have a few noticeable drawbacks. The engines were prone to overheating, and due to the plane's significant weight of over 50 tons, they struggled to lift the DOX to an altitude of about 425 meters, which for an aircraft's pretty low. This low flight would certainly have drawn attention, as it flew so close to cities and buildings that the pilot could probably witness the astonished expressions on people's faces as this 50-ton giant soared through the sky. Due to the unique engine setup, the layout of this plane differs from that of modern aircraft. Below the cockpit is a bridge reminiscent of a ship. Behind the cockpit is a navigation room, and beyond that lies the engine room. Inside, an engineer would adjust the power of each of the 12 engines as needed for the flight and monitor the 12 separate gauges, similar to how engineers on ships manage their power systems. The pilot would send an engine order telegraph to the engineer, who would then carry out the instructions. Additionally, there was a radio room for communication with the ground crew. On the highest deck, the resemblance to a marriage between air and sea travel becomes evident. The Dornier DOX, inspired by the transatlantic cruise liners of the time, featured multiple decks. The main deck was where passengers sat, but this was not your standard budget airliner experience. There were no crying babies behind you or middle seats squeezed in between two armrest hogs. This was a classic air cruise liner. Passengers traveled in luxury, a stark contrast to many airplanes today. The Dornier DOX offered luxury and comfort, with tables and plush chairs for high society passengers to enjoy tea during their flights. For seating, there were leather armchairs along with sofa-like options, some of which could be converted into sleeping compartments for overnight travel. For those not inclined to sleep while flying, the DOX provided plenty of amenities. A dining room on the main deck was available for meals, alongside a smoking room and a fully stocked bar. While in-flight movies were absent, a newspaper would suffice for entertainment. Behind the passenger areas was an all-electric section dedicated to storing and serving food, with bathroom facilities and a cargo hold. The entire interior was adorned with luxurious Persian carpets and rich decorations, reflecting the opulent style of a 1920s Mediterranean cruise. The DOX prioritized luxury over practicality. After all, what self-respecting gentleman of the 1920s would travel without a touch of mahogany? One deck further down, you would find the fuel tanks, capable of holding thousands of litres. The exact capacity is debated. Sources report anywhere from 12,000 to over 20,000 litres. Considering that the Dornier DOX could traverse the Atlantic Ocean despite its fuel-hungry engines, we can say that it certainly held enough fuel for long-haul flights, and we're glad we could clear that up for everybody. And look, additionally, the aircraft was equipped with 9 watertight compartments on the lowest deck, although only 7 were necessary for full flotation. Similar to a ship, if the Dornier took on water in one compartment, it could be counter-flooded on the opposite side to maintain stability. As far as we know, this measure was never needed during its operational life. And this raises the question, why construct something like this? Something so impractical, so massive, so extraordinary? Well, as we mentioned, seaplanes are not new inventions. This concept blurs the line between a plane and a boat so much that it's unclear whether to classify it as a seaplane or a flying ship. However, there are several reasons why such a hybrid might have been developed. One compelling reason would be the challenge of seeing whether it could be achieved. Aircraft of this scale had not existed before, and the ambition to construct a truly enormous plane that could potentially fly might have led to significant commercial success. Although airships were around at the time, the Hindenburg disaster, still a decade away, demonstrated their drawbacks. Dornier was a visionary who saw airplanes as the future, highlighting their superior reliability for long-distance travel compared to airships. An airship disaster over the Atlantic could be life-threatening, while a seaplane or a flying boat facing difficulties could simply land on the water with minimal fuss. Many seaplanes still use this concept today, especially in areas like the South Pacific and across Oceania, where island hopping by plane is much faster and more practical than building bridges between islands that are sometimes dozens of miles apart. With aircraft like the Dornier DOX, there wasn't even a need to construct an airport, as illustrated by its landing in the Hudson River. You could simply locate the nearest body of water at your destination and proceed from there. At that time, regulations for air travel were minimal compared to today, so as long as you could land safely and taxi to shore, there was not really an issue. Weather conditions also posed less of a disadvantage for the DOX. Although it was unable to fly above the clouds due to its weight, which exposed it to weather conditions below, the plane was designed for water. It might have experienced some turbulence, but at least it could fly in the rain, whereas other aircraft might be grounded. In the end, only 3 of these beautiful machines were ever built. The first, known as the DOX-1, served as a promotional vehicle for the company, flying around the world to showcase its innovation to the masses. The other two, creatively named the DOX-2 and DOX-3, were utilized by the Italian Navy. These last two aircraft had slightly different specifications from the original, being a bit larger and equipped with different engines. But what's the story of Dornier, and how did this skyboat even come to exist? And why, despite its many advantages, did it not achieve commercial success? And also, where did the DOX aircraft eventually end up? Claudius Dornier, the visionary behind the flying ship and the Dornier Company, was naturally gifted. He completed his engineering studies at Munich Technical College in the late 1900s. Interested in the emerging field of aviation, he pursued a position at an aviation company and eventually joined the German Zeppelin factory in Friedrichshafen. There, he caught the attention of Count von Zeppelin and became his chief scientific advisor. Dornier mainly focused on incorporating new lightweight metals into airship frames. However, his true passion lay in airplanes and exploring how these groundbreaking alloys could be applied to fixed-wing aircraft. In 1911, he designed the first all-metal plane, leading the Count to allow him to establish his own division within the company, known as the Dornier Aircraft Works. When World War I erupted in the 1910s, one can imagine that Dornier might have had mixed feelings about the conflict, given his German mother and French father. Nevertheless, he remained loyal to the Kaiser's empire, dedicating himself to designing and building airships and planes that were used throughout the war. However, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the final bombs fell as Germany surrendered and the Treaty of Versailles was enacted. This treaty severely restricted Germany's ability to build planes at all. And this is where the story of the Dornier DOX truly begins. To circumvent the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles on the German aviation industry, Dornier, who had regained full control of his factory after the war, relocated his operations just across the border to Switzerland at a shipyard in Altenhain on Lake Constance. His work was funded not by the Defense Ministry, but by the Transport Ministry, allowing Dornier to resume building planes. In 1918, Dornier's works had constructed the Zeppelin Lindau RS-4 seaplane that never saw combat as the war ended before it could reach the front lines. Shortly thereafter, Dornier developed the DOJ-WAL, also known as the Whale. This aircraft shared many features with the DOX, such as push-pull engines and sponsons, and it proved to be a long-lasting and reliable design. With war and treaty constraints lifted, Dornier was eager to pursue even larger ambitions. The initial designs for the DOX were drafted in 1924. By 1929, and after nearly 250,000 man-hours, it was ready for its first test flight, and it was successful. While it didn't fly very high or for very long, the plane achieved its initial goal. The DOX wasn't just notable for being the largest plane of its time. During its 70th test flight in October 1929, it set a new record by carrying over 150 passengers on a single flight, a record that would hold for the next 2 decades. After a 50-second takeoff run, the DOX climbed to approximately 200 meters, a height that is low enough to crash into the Eiffel Tower about 2/3 of the way up. Inside, passengers were asked to crowd together on each side to assist with making turns. By 1930, the Dornier DOX had completed 103 flights, proving its concept. Following this success, the aircraft underwent several upgrades. The interior was redesigned to offer more luxurious layout for passengers. Although it originally seated 150 people, the new design prioritized comfort over capacity, and typically there were about 100 passengers on board for short-haul flights, with longer journeys catering to around 66 travelers. One of the most significant modifications was the engines. The DOX was equipped with 610 horsepower Curtiss Conqueror water-cooled V12s, allowing it to reach a respectable altitude of 500 meters. This advancement enabled the DOX to be capable of crossing the Atlantic. As a technical and engineering marvel, the DOX was showcased worldwide to demonstrate the prowess of German engineering. However, there was a slight issue. While the aircraft was designed for transatlantic travel, the new engines consumed a lot of fuel, making the journey across the Atlantic challenging. In 1930, the DOX embarked on its journey from Switzerland, where it was built, flying to the Netherlands, the UK, France, and Spain before landing in Portugal. There, it faced a setback when a fire damaged much of one ring, requiring weeks of repair. Afterward, the plane continued down the west coast of Africa, reached the Cape Verde Islands, and eventually set off toward the New World, landing in Brazil. From Brazil, it turned north, arriving in New York by August 1931. The flying ship, which had caused a sensation everywhere it stopped, was expected to entice wealthy American buyers. However, the Great Depression had struck the USA just 2 years earlier in 1929, leaving few with the means to invest in luxury planes like the DOX. Although the aircraft garnered attention across Europe and the Americas, the transatlantic venture ultimately failed to meet commercial expectations. Nonetheless, it was able to complete the return trip in just 3 days, a significant achievement given that the journey to New York had taken months. This feat was remarkable considering Charles Lindbergh had only flown solo across the Atlantic 5 years earlier in 1927. Now, this impressive aircraft was making similar trips with scores of passengers in relative luxury. Dornier invested heavily in the venture, but couldn't afford more flights for the DOX. As a result, the original aircraft was handed over to Germany's national airline Lufthansa. The plan for its next major tour in 1933 was to visit Vienna, Budapest, and Istanbul. However, it only reached Passau, a city with a reservoir in Bavaria, because the tail was torn off during a failed landing on a lake. This incident effectively ended any potential market for the DOX in Europe. Lufthansa was uninterested in maintaining such a large and complex aircraft. After being repaired, it was moved to the Berlin Museum of Technology, where it is on permanent display. Notably, the DOX-2 and X-3 were sold to Italy in 1931, with plans for them to operate as luxury passenger planes. However, this idea never came to fruition. Instead, the Italian military took possession of them, hoping to find a use. Unfortunately, the Italian engines installed were even weaker than the original Dornier designs, relegating the aircraft to little more than a long-range maritime patrol vessel. Ultimately, the story ends on a disappointing note. By 1937, the Italian Navy scrapped both the DOX-2 and the DOX-3 as Europe was gearing up for war and Italy couldn't spare any materials. Meanwhile, in Nazi Germany, the DOX-1 was housed in the Berlin Museum of Technology. Tragically, during an Allied air raid in late November 1943, the museum was bombed and the original was destroyed. Along with the aircraft, most of the construction plans were also lost. Dornier himself passed away in 1969, leaving behind a legacy of remarkable machines, some used for good, others not. Yet it seemed that his most ambitious and extraordinary creation was destined to be buried with him. Or was it? This incredible aircraft has amassed a devoted following over the years. Admirers are drawn to its sheer scale, its slightly eccentric appearance, and its impressive fusion of maritime and aerial design. A select group of enthusiasts is now dedicated to resurrecting the Dornier DOX. At the forefront of this effort is Peter Karlhorn, a former Dornier employee. You see, after the DOX, the Dornier company continued to thrive as a crucial part of the German war effort. Post-war, it transitioned into a successful private company producing jets, military aircraft, spacecraft, and yes, even seaplanes. After retiring, Karlhorn sought a new project to undertake. Reflecting on this period, he said, "After finishing my book, I looked for my next challenge, and I decided to write about the DOX, or the construction of the DOX. This decision came in 2013 or 2014. The DOX captivated Karlhorn's interest, and he quickly connected with other enthusiasts who were equally fascinated by the flying ship. However, they were not satisfied with it merely being an intriguing engineering feat lost to history. Karlhorn and several others set out to reconstruct an original DOX-1 replica. Although Karlhorn faced the daunting task of rebuilding an aircraft whose plans had largely been lost for decades, he was undeterred. In 2014, he reached out to the University of Friedrichshafen, the very place where the original Dornier company was established nearly a century earlier, to seek assistance. By 2018, the universities of Lörrach and Mosbach had also joined the endeavor. Gradually, a volunteer organization called the Friends and Support Association, DOX, formed around the project. However, this undertaking would prove to be anything but straightforward. There were very few surviving plans left. Before any parts could be cut, a digital replica of the plane needed to be designed to meet the correct specifications. That's where the universities came in. With eager students using computer-aided design software for their final projects, students were able to create a digital version of the DOX according to the specific requirements provided by volunteers. This digital creation was based on three-sided drawings of the DOX, interior views of the flying ship, and high-resolution images of fuselage frames and structural components taken during the construction of the original. The Flight Museum of Altenrhein had an original DOX propeller that the team could scan with lasers to reverse engineer it. Overall, the universities and their students dedicated 96,000 man-hours to creating the digital data needed for the project. The final stage, before parts are cut and built en masse, involves the detailed design of the structural components, which is still ongoing. However, thanks to some source materials from Dornier, progress is being made. By August 2021, 54 ribs of the original fuselage have been designed in detail, meaning the completed fuselage of the ship was nearly ready for rebuilding at that time. Plans for the next stages involve assembling the plane, which is designed like a large Lego set in Switzerland. A spacious facility near Lake Constance, capable of housing the constructed aircraft, makes the possibility of the DOX touching water again a reality. As of January 2024, Peter Karlhorn estimated that approximately 2% of the replica has been built. The goal is to complete the digital DOX by 2026, paving the way for the fully realized and reconstructed replica to be ready in time for the 100th anniversary of the DOX's first test flight on July the 12th, 2029. But here's a crucial question. will it fly? And sorry to disappoint you, but as far as we know, the replica won't be able to fly. However, it will be fully buoyant, built to full scale, and capable of taxiing on water using electric power. The team has even redesigned the Curtiss V12 engines thanks to Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, which provided a manual of the original. So, almost a century after the last remnants of the Dornier DOX were seemingly destroyed forever, it may soon be brought back from the brink of extinction for humanity to witness in awe once again. The flying boat is already gaining popularity and traction in the mainstream. You can even buy and fly it yourself on Microsoft Flight Simulator if that's your thing. But if you wait just a little longer, by 2029, you should be able to see the real thing for yourself. The Dornier DOX, while not commercially successful, was emblematic of the era in which it was built. It was a symbol of ambition and promise, representing a quest to find new approaches to old challenges. Although it wasn't the prettiest, easiest to fly, or most efficient aircraft, its very existence is something to be celebrated. The DOX was a marvel of its time, showcasing not only the burgeoning power of aviation, but also illustrating that daring to dream propels humanity forward, even if only gradually. A quote from the Friends of the DOX website succinctly captures this sentiment, likely reflecting Dornier's own beliefs. You just have to want it. Then it will succeed. Thank you for watching.